Thank you guys for coming tonight and taking time out of your day to learn more about the Smile Project with all that you are preparing to do for the rest of your trip and trying to incorporate considering using these cameras on the trip. So I am Jen Locke. I'm a research associate at Reef and I work on the Smile Project. And so that stands for Size Matters Innovative Length Estimates. So I'm going to tell you more about that project tonight and how to use the camera so that when you see them on your trip, or when you see them dockside, if you're viewing the webinar for those purposes, you have some familiarity with the camera, what species we're looking for, and what the project is all about. So this project does not occur in isolation. We have a lot of partners that work with us for this project and fund it. So this is actually a NOAA CRCP grant that we work in close partnership with the South Atlantic Fisheries Management Council, Scripps Institute of Oceanography, and UC San Diego Engineers for Exploration, and then data partners at Sakura and Axiom/Tetra Tech. So the SMILE project stands for Size Matters Innovative Length Estimates. And the goal of this project is to implement fish length measurements using an in situ tool that is cost effective and that is actually really easy to use so that our citizen scientists can use it. And not so the goal of the SMILE project is to implement fish length measurements in the field or in situ that can contribute to the existing volunteer fish survey project to improve future stock assessments for data limited species like grouper and snapper to ultimately inform management and conservation efforts. So basically, length or fish size is a really important metric that's used in fisheries assessments and management. This is because size can reflect population change. We can even estimate how old something is just based on its size. So, for example, there are growth age curves that relate the size of a fish to its age that have been obtained from the ear bones of fish that have little lines just like tree rings that have been marked and counted to know how old a fish is. To gather those data over time, fish are harvested to do that and to develop those curves. So, a little bit more detail than you need, but basically, we use those curves to kind of back calculate how old something is based on its size. It's also related to the biomass or the mass or the weight of a fish, and it's also reflective of its reproductive potential. So a lot of really crucial things come out about not only the biology of the fish, but the population at large just from size data. And we're really lacking in that in a lot of our different fish species and groups that are managed. So it's really crucial to provide more information to those areas, but also do it in a way that's not removing fish from the population. So we have some in situ methods that professional scientists use that are a bit bulky, expensive, and not conducive to doing with the volunteer fish survey project. So enter the Smile cameras, an easy to use, affordable camera system that is used to get images of fish with a laser to figure out how far away that fish is to estimate their lengths. The other reason, maybe if it's not so much into the science and management aspect to get involved with the SMILE project, is because it's new science. This is cutting edge science, which means we're constantly changing it. And we also need feedback from the users of these cameras. But some people like getting involved with new tech and like being, the first ones to try something out. So there is no other tool that really checks these boxes for us yet. It's also fun and easy. What could be more fun than playing laser tag with a fish underwater? And that's quite literally what you're doing. And that's really all that it takes. It's kind of like playing a video game or something with fish underwater. You just need to get the laser on the side of them, hold your burst mode to get a picture of it, and you're already helping us collect length data. The other advantage is if you're not great at Fish ID, but you still really want to get involved with collecting important data for science. So not only can you use it while doing a fish survey, but if you're somebody who is a Reef member or interested in joining Reef, but you're kind of overwhelmed or it's daunting to kind of learn hundreds of fish species, for the SMILE project, all you have to do is learn 12 different species of fish to contribute quality data that help fill these data gaps for and really important fishes. So this is what the Smile camera looks like. It is what you're seeing here is the external housing, but within is an Olympus TG6 camera. So this is a common recreational camera that's used by recreational divers. And if you're not using it, it's actually very easy to use. So it's a point and shoot camera. We house it inside of its regular underwater housing. And then the little modifications that we have is a detachable wide angle lens or dome port that is on the housing, which is really just used right now to reduce the distortion on the edges of the image. And then we have a cold shoe mount that houses the laser. The information between the location of the laser, the housing itself, the lens, and the camera are all calibrated. And we can change the lasers in and out. And we definitely do that a lot as lasers break. So if something breaks or a mount breaks, it's really not a big deal where you're accustomed to fixing that. The position of it and those units together is calibrated, but the laser itself can be moving in and out, just as an FYI. So the one thing about collecting data for the SMILE project is we do have specific camera settings for it. If you've done a few dives with the camera and you're comfortable, especially with the TG6 housing and the camera system itself, you can move back and forth between settings, but just make sure that you're comfortable with that first. Basically, all these settings should be set by the time that you have the camera, so you don't necessarily need to check these. As long as the program button on the lower left corner is set to P, all those program settings will be there. If it gets turned to A or something else, you can adjust it with the little wheel and set it back. But basically the camera settings that we work with, especially if you are more photography skilled than I am and are more, aware of these different features, we shoot with the flash off to minimize any of the backscatter in the image that we're collecting. With ISO at 1600, the exposure bias at 0. We shoot in burst mode, and I mentioned that already a little bit, and I will come back to that, but that's so that we get multiple images of the same individual. We shoot with underwater shallow white balance. ESP metering is on. Face priority and accessories are off. The JPEG mode is underwater. It's set to autofocus. The aspect ratio is 4:3. The still image stabilization is set to on. And then the output format that we have is the RAW file. So every image that we take has a RAW file that's associated with it. And that's what helps us compute the length of that fish in the post-processing. So that right now, at least with this technology, is crucial to getting the length estimation. So as I mentioned, you can move between the different settings. You can go to macro and flash, but just make sure, if you see something really cool, like a little cleaner shrimp like that, or a anemone shrimp, I should say, you can shoot to macro if you want that image later, but just make sure you go back to your program settings. But these just show you some examples of things with the lens on and off. You can technically take that lens off, just make sure it's not going to float off on you or something. But basically, it does look essentially the same even when the lens is present. So the procedure for using the camera is that we check the camera settings topside so that all those settings are correct and that the date and time are correct on the camera, because we also use that to know at what, not only with where the camera was used, but at what time of day and what date for when we're assimilating, collating all these data. So we're checking that those settings are topside, and then you enter the water as you normally would. Once you're in the water with the camera and comfortable, we say that you need to burp the lens. In other words, you will loosen and tighten that external lens. So we loosen it just to let water flood between the housing and the lens itself to get rid of any air bubbles, and then tighten it back up. You'll turn on the laser underwater. These lasers will not hurt you, but we just recommend that you don't turn them on until you're underwater, so you're not kind of flashing it around, and we're sparing the battery a little bit. And then the little procedural, little housekeeping things that we need to do for using the camera is right now we need to take photos of a calibration dive slate, and I'll show you what that looks like. This will be done at 4 different distances in your burst mode, and then you can go out and perform your dive as normal. So I'll talk more about all of these items, but by aiming the laser on the side of the fish, like you see in my little diagram there, and you can perform your fish survey at the same time if you're doing that, which I know people a lot on the reef survey trips are doing. At the end of the dive, we just have you repeat these dive slate procedures. That just helps the engineers doing the post-processing to know if that mount did wiggle or anything, that basically if the laser drifted in its position during the dive. And then we just recommend you turn the laser off before getting on the boat, turn the camera off if you're doing a dive after that, just to spare that battery a little bit, but we always pack extras. So just to get into some more of these details, as I've already said, when you're topside, we just make sure that the camera settings, which I previously showed you, are correct. A quick check of that is the P in the lower left corner of the view of the screen itself, and that the date and time are correct. And then this sounds silly, but just make sure the camera is on. And periodically, if you're diving, if you haven't taken a picture of a fish in a while, like maybe more than 5 minutes, just check your screen that the camera is still on, because the battery saver mode will turn it off if it's been, I think it's like 10 minutes, but still, just in case. Anyway, so when you're underwater, it's basically just the initial part of the dive that there's any of these little housekeeping items, but you'll loosen and tighten the lens, again, just to allow water to flood between the housing and the lens, and then you'll tighten it back up. You'll turn the laser on by turning it. I think for this current iteration of the laser, it's on the front of it. So like where the light would be coming out is where you're turning. But we usually just say to like hold the camera or maybe the laser mount a little bit steady as you turn that. I don't have a camera on me, sorry. So I'm miming these things with my hands, but so you'll see that it comes on. We'll often put our hand in front of the laser just to make sure you're able to see it and you're not losing it in the water to confirm that it's on. And then the calibration process is your dive buddy will hold this. It's now a V-shaped dive slate like you see here, this kind of upside down V. It doesn't really matter which way you hold it. And that's the advantage of using that shape. The engineers can figure out what's up and down as opposed to the old slate that you see me holding in that picture. These are the things we learn as we're developing new technology and a new research project. So once you're in a comfortable position, once you've descended with your dive buddy holding the slate, you'll take a picture of that dive slate in your burst mode, and then you'll kick back and do that 3 more times. So for a total of 4 distances, burst mode, taking a picture of the laser hitting the slate. It might be hard to see on the black tape, but with these new slates, they're a little bit easier than they used to be. But just a note, you'll sometimes lose the laser on a dark surface. So some best practices for during your dive. So now you've finished the calibration process, you finished flooding the lens and tightening it back up. Your camera's on, your lasers are on. Now you just get to go and play laser tag with fish. So the big thing is shooting in burst mode. So the little trigger button at the top of the camera, you'll just hold that down for 2 to 3 seconds at minimum, long enough to get a good burst. Some people, like I said, will just hold it and follow the fish. You're going to get a bunch of pictures and that's totally fine. But so basically we just need at least some level of burst mode. The ideal angle for putting the laser on the fish is as perpendicular and central to the fish body as possible. And I'll show you some examples. Basically like broadside, lateral side of the fish and getting the laser as central as you can. It doesn't have to be perfect. We know we're dealing with living, breathing, moving things. And that's part of the advantage of using burst mode is that we have lots of pictures to work with. So we can measure the fish in several images and basically build out an average with an error value to that to get their best length estimation. The distance is about 0.5 meter to 5 meters. This can also vary with water quality, but optimally about 3 meters. These current lasers rather are pretty strong. So you'll probably get more distance out of them than we used to, but you still kind of lose it at about 15 feet out. If the laser is on the fish, it is visible through the camera. So you don't have to look at the screen or the viewfinder to make sure you're lined up. The fixed position of that laser mount ensures that if the laser's on the fish and you take a picture, the whole thing is going to be in the screen. If you're really close to a huge fish like a Goliath grouper, that's my note at the bottom, you may need to check that, but I was just shooting a small Goliath grouper this month and I had plenty of room. So that's the only time I say you really need to check the screen. Or as I mentioned, if you haven't used it in a while, just make sure that the screen is on, that your camera's on. Just a couple of notes that we've noticed with working at it. If you're working with it, if you're like moving the camera really fast, you're probably going to struggle to track the laser. So you can kind of think of it maybe as like a video game or something, like you're just kind of following your target as slowly as you can. Some fish are going to bolt from the laser. They see it, they get freaked out. It just kind of depends on the individual, depends on the water quality. Some fish love the laser and they come to it. So don't get discouraged if feels like you're scaring off fish. It's just kind of happens sometimes. Otherwise, just don't, if you're moving it really quick, you're not gonna be able to see it. Other things that people do is if they feel like you're struggling to track where the laser is, because it's, heading an object out in front of you, they'll put it down on the sand and then bring it up to the subject and see until you can kind of start tracking it better. So there's kind of ways that you can help get your bearings back with the laser. It can be harder to see on darker fish. The green lasers we use right now are a lot better at this, but like a really dark midnight parrotfish, you might lose it. Maybe on a black grouper, you could lose it as well, but it just kind of depends on your visibility and how dark those fish are sometimes. And then we just say be cognizant of not capturing the same fish later in the dive. And we can always notate that if you saw a grouper initially and when you come back around at the end of your dive and you see it again, you feel like you have a really good opportunity to take a picture of that fish. Maybe just note it on our dive record at the end. So we don't want to discourage you from taking a picture if it's a really good shot. Just maybe we can account for it somehow to know that it's not a different fish, that it's the same one. And that's where some of our other projects like Grouper Spotter can help us with some of the ones that have nice patterns that we can do pattern recognition with. So some quality examples on here, speaking of black grouper, you can just kind of see the location of the laser on some of these fishes. And you can see the old red lasers that we used to use, and now we're currently on green. So in this, low visibility environment on a dark fish, I'm still getting that green laser. And you can kind of just see all of these are like as central to the fish on the side of their body, and they're not perfect, but they're pretty close. They're pretty good, and we can work with that. Poor examples are like a really harsh angle, like this hogfish is kind of swimming away. That's a harsh angle. It's hard to find the snout on that. Same thing with this stoplight parrotfish coming towards us. Or if a fish body is really turned. Totally okay if you take these pictures. We all take them because again, this is a living, moving subject, and that's what's going to happen. So we just wouldn't use those pictures. It's not a big deal at all to take them. But just to give you an idea of what we're going for is the images on the left. There's other ones in here where they're like not even on a fish. You could tell the ones that are taken in California. I think this isn't even a fish. It looks like a sea cucumber or something. Or like you could see the beam of the laser in this image and it's not quite hitting any of the fish. So certainly want it on target on the fish as central and to the side as you can. But reiterating, it does not need to be perfect. So I will was looking at the chat there. Sorry about that. So I'll tell you guys about our target species now. So these are the species that we are after. And at the end, I'll talk about them for your actual trip location because I looked up some of their frequency for that. But this is our curated list of fish. These very lucky species get to be photographed by our wonderful citizen scientists. We're like the paparazzi of the sea right now. Okay. And these are our celebrity fish. So we are after any of the big grouper basically, but I'll still go through these one by one. So we have the black grouper to start. They are kind of like a nice slender grouper, but they are really identified by that black margin on their caudal fin. So sometimes they're kind of like flushed out. If they're near the sand, they're not going to show all these patterns, but you will still see that black margin on their tail. Otherwise, when they're showing their pretty colors and their patterns, to me, they have like a chain link pattern against their body. And when it comes to the behavior for all these fishes, I'll tell you if there's any behavioral things in response to the camera. Black groupers are pretty shy when it comes to being photographed. What I've found is they like to play a little game of cat and mouse with us. They will bolt away, but they will always come back. So I don't know if it's just they really want to be photographed or if you're just hanging out near their spot and they're waiting for you to leave. But whatever it is, sometimes just patience, they'll come back around and you can get them. But they might be the most challenging because of that. Nassau grouper is our next big grouper species. They have these beautiful like reddish bars to them. They have like this Y-shaped bar on their forehead. That's pretty classic of a Nassau grouper. And then the black patch, the saddle patch on their caudal peduncle. You can see them at other times, especially when they're spawning in their other color phases, like a bicolor phase. But outside of those kind of behavioral things, they would look like this. And sometimes they might be a little bit flushed out and faded out over the sand too. But that black saddle patch will always be there. The red grouper can look kind of similar to a Nassau, but I feel like, in my opinion, like their mouths are bigger. They just have like a bigger head and it goes down to like a smaller tail. So they seem to be like all upper body, these fish. And sometimes you'll kind of see the red blotchiness to them. that's to me when they can look like a NASA, where you might have a moment you're like, oh, no, that's a red grouper. The other thing about them is they are the complete opposite behaviorally with the cameras than the black grouper. They do not care about being photographed. This is probably why red grouper gets speared a lot, because they're just will sit there and you can hug them if you want to, I think. So they're really easygoing. I wish we encountered more of them because they are so easy to photograph. Then we have the Goliath grouper, the largest species, of course. They tend to hang out under ledges. That they have kind of this mottled appearance to them. Kind of can look like a little mix of like bars and blotches, but really kind of this mottled appearance. Their caudal fin will be nice and kind of smooth on the end. Then we have hogfish that don't really look like anything else on the list. Hogfish can switch up their colors really quick, so they might have that mottled look to them, where they're kind of like a patchy, mottledy, reddish color when they're over sand. Sometimes they have this color where they have this patch on their forehead that's kind of like a bicolor type of look. I feel like I'm missing one. But what's always distinguishing about them is they have like these, their dorsal fin has these nice little flare fins to them. And then they have a little black patch on their dorsal fin as well, the back of their dorsal fin. And then their tail has like this pretty like lobe that comes off of the end of it. So basically all these features that make hogfish pretty different than everything else. They're pretty photogenic as well, but there is some individual variation with the laser. So some of them are freaked out by it and other ones don't care. So your experience may differ in Roatan when you're there, but that's kind of their deal in the Keys. On to our snappers. We have mutton snapper, which are most indicative by their black spot on their posterior dorsal area, like just above the lateral line. Their face is like pretty smooth looking and triangular to me. And then sometimes you'll see like these faded white bars like you see in this photo. They tend to be kind of solitary, or sometimes I find them in like solitary pairs, like they're kind of just a pair near each other lingering. They're pretty curious as well, but they're not going to get as close as like a yellowtail snapper. So that tends to be how they're photographed. They'll let us get to them, but not super close, and they're not going to dart away like a black grouper. And mutton were pretty common in your area as well. We've just recently added yellowtail. This is a really common species, of course, throughout the tropical Western Atlantic. They are a snapper species, but don't really look like any of the other snappers, and they are a different genus, so that explains some of that. Has a very heavily forked tail, and that blue line runs right through their body into that forked tail. And then they have almost like these yellow freckles. Sometimes they can be mistaken with the yellow goatfish, but those behaviors are very different because the goatfish are usually down in the substrate, kind of using their little barbels to forage, whereas yellowtail might be kind of schooling down at the bottom. They may be up in the water column. They just kind of don't discriminate on a reef, in my opinion. You can kind of find them wherever. Then we have the gray or mangrove snapper. They can look kind of drab on the reef, which I hate to say because I love them. When they're in kind of more of a near shore environment, you might see that pretty electric blue under their eyes, which mutton snapper also have. But not that much, I feel like, on the reef. They have you could still kind of see their individual scales, but they might be like a reddishy, purplish kind of gray color, hence their name. Their tail doesn't really have any fork to it. It's pretty like straight on the edge. And then to me, their closest look-alike, just from diving with them in the Keys, is probably the mahogany snapper. But you can really tell the difference. Even if you're like with poor water quality, you may not see that kind of reddish margin on the fins of the mahogany. The size of that eye on a mahogany is much larger. So that to me is really the immediate separator with the mangrove snapper and the mahogany. They actually have a very similar body type to the schoolmaster, but their coloration is very different, of course. And then lastly, we have 4 species of parrotfish. So we have the midnight parrotfish, which has that classic parrotfish beak shape to it. And they have a dark midnight blue, hence the name, color to their body with like this beautiful, like electric cerulean blue patches to it. They can be schooling. They can also be solitary. So we kind of see perhaps all of these parrotfish in that way. Next, we have the rainbow parrotfish, which is also has the classic parrotfish beak, but is really identified by these red and, or excuse me, the orange and green color patterns. So almost like a bicolor between orange and green. So very vibrant color with the rainbow parrotfish. Next, we have the blue parrotfish, and the shape of their head is what really gives away a blue parrotfish. They have a very broad forehead, and they don't really have that classic look as the other parrotfish where their beak is like very terminal. Theirs is turned down a little bit because of that broad forehead. They're a beautiful powder blue. Younger individuals like this one may have like a pinkish or a yellowish patch near their operculum. That kind of fades away as they get older, and then that forehead becomes really blunt, squared off as they get bigger, and they can get big. Same thing, they might be schooling or solitary. And then lastly, we have the stoplight parrotfish. You will always find some stoplights in the Caribbean and tropical Western Atlantic in general. They have three primary phases. There is the juvenile stoplight and the intermediate stoplight, and then lastly, the terminal. So the intermediate phase, I'll start there. They have kind of some variation to the reddish color on their fins and on their belly, but to me, they look like a pine cone because their scales are so defined that they almost look like a pine cone to me. The juveniles are similar, but they kind of have a play on that where they're obviously smaller, but they have these little white dots on them. They kind of look like a pine cone with like little white snowflakes on them, and then this white patch on their caudal fin. They both look very different from the terminal phase of the stoplight parrotfish, which gives them their name. They have this yellow patch on their caudal peduncle and a yellow like dot, like a yellow spot on their operculum. So even in poor water visibility, if you're not quite sure if it's a stoplight based on the body shape, those two yellow markings usually give them away. And behaviorally, terminals are hilarious. They're very zoomy. If you've ever noticed this on the reef. So the intermediate phase, they just kind of bob around and do the parrotfish thing as they're foraging, and they're very approachable. Terminals are like they're always busy. They're zooming around. They don't have the time for us. So they might be a little bit harder to get on camera. We can get them, but I just noticed that about them. So the way that we chose these 12 species is because we, one, don't want people to be having to take pictures of fish the entire time that they're diving. That would be exhausting. It would be exhausting from a data and science perspective too. So we wanted to have the species that tell us most about what's going on in the population and within the ecosystem. So we chose species that are of economic and ecological importance, hence our predators that are targeted by fisheries like your grouper, snapper, and hogfish. But we also wanted an ecosystem indicator. So that's how we chose these 4 species of parrotfish as herbivores or corallivores within the tropical Western Atlantic. They can be an indicator species of reef health. So that's how we got to our current curated list. These things may change based on management needs for data as the project moves on in the future. But right now, this is what we have. One tip that I've gotten from surveyors is if you are surveying at the same time as using the Smile camera, so that you're not trying to remember all the species, people will just mark these species on their survey sheet so that you have like a quick reference. I will send down a image of this target species list with Sierra and Hillary, so you guys will also have access to that on the boat. And then again, if you miss any of these, it's not a big deal. Any data that we're getting is more than we already have. So hopefully you can think of it that way.
Okay.
So just to kind of review the procedure for using the cameras, now that I've gone through all these various details, we just check the camera settings and date and time topside. When we enter the water, we are just flooding that lens by loosening and tightening the lens itself, turning the camera and the laser on, and then that little housekeeping at the beginning and end of the dive, which is taking photos of the calibration slate, the little V. And we do that at 4 separate distances in burst mode. And then you go and perform your dive as you would. So as you're kind of doing your survey or as you're just doing your dive for fun, if you're just encountering some of these target species, we would love for you to take pictures of those by getting the laser on the side of their body, holding in burst mode, and rinse and repeat, basically, anytime you encounter some of these. And then we'll turn off the laser when we get on the boat. We'll record any of the data on our sheet about who used the camera and where and when. And we will be uploading that data ourselves. So the next step is not even something for you to worry about. And while I have you here, I included this in an email today, but the other big ask that we're doing for this project is a citizen science survey. So we've developed a formal survey with social scientists that do this for a living. So they have made it very rigorous and structured for us to ask about what are the types of motivators and potentially barriers for people to participate in a project like this, in this project specifically, and even in just like conservation technology and marine monitoring. So we ask questions about like what makes citizen scientists get involved in this sort of thing? What demographics are more likely to get involved in this type of project as opposed to another? So all of this will help us not only specifically refine this project for use with citizen scientists, but also at large kind of inform what motivates citizen scientists to get engaged in this type of work. So we're compiling all these data for a peer-reviewed publication with those collaborators. So this QR code will direct you to the survey. And we really need everybody to fill out the survey that encounters it. But the really big thing right now too is once divers use it, there is a separate post survey that tells us about your experience with the camera. And that's where we really need some more input from people. So if you do use the cameras, we would be most grateful. And then I would have one more ask of you, which is to fill out a 10-minute post survey when you're done. You can do that back at your room, on board or anything like that at the end of the day, or we can catch you at the end of the trip. But that's our other ask for now. This was a big push for us for the next couple months until we start analyzing these data. So I will wrap it up there, but this is our wonderful infographic that summarizes much of what I just said to you guys, but highlights why we do this project, why this information is important,